Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Teresa. I do videos on whatever I want. And today I finally have my neuropsychological test results back. And I'm going to be really picky about my hair right now because it's a little bit all over the place. But I finally got them back. I called like a few weeks ago and then they said they'll be ready in like 2 weeks. 2 weeks had passed. Didn't get anything in the mail. And then I was like, okay, give it a little bit longer. Gave it a bit longer. Literally nothing. I kept forgetting to call them back. And then I finally called this week. They were like, okay, they'll like be in the mail. You should get them in a week. And then I was like, okay, did they get sent out like today? Like, are they actually like in the mail? And then they called me and they're like, they're ready at our office if you want to pick them up, or we can mail them off. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to pick them up at the office. And luckily, I was literally on the street where their office is. And I just dropped off a client to go do their laundry. They're very independent with it and picked up the results. And so, yeah. Anyways, so if you don't know this journey, I have been getting officially diagnosed with my learning disability. I've had one since like first grade. Um, I had an IEP since first grade for specific learning disability, and more specifically, it was for math, which the actual learning disability is called dyscalculia. It's a learning disability specific to math calculations and like quantity of things. It also affects your day-to-day life. Um, Literally don't know how to like navigate through the town I live in without the use of a GPS. Um, don't understand like how to figure out if something is like 50% off, that kind of thing. Measurements for like a recipe can be really challenging to figure out. Let's see. Like visual spatial awareness in the sense of if I'm driving on the interstate and I have to pass somebody, am I going to like have enough room to like fit in, and my exit is really like close by. That's an issue. I never parallel park because of that issue of the visual spatial awareness, because I have a tiny car, but like I just don't want to like risk hitting anybody. Which I know a lot of people don't parallel park, but for me it's very much that like visual spatial awareness thing. And so, yeah, you'll kind of see all of that coming into play in this. And I'm only going to read you guys the summary because that's really the only thing I can kind of truly understand. I can piece together the rest of the information, but from also what I like talked about with the person who tested me, this is kind of really everything that she talked to me about is all in this like summary. So I'm just kind of read it to you guys, and I'm going to be kind of careful because there might be some things that I don't want to like read out loud and share with the internet. Let's get into this. So Teresa is a 26. I'm now 27. I just had my birthday in October. Here in Montana, the state I live in, they do not do testing past 26. So that's an important thing to note. And it's just insurance reasons. So Teresa is a 26-year-old female who completed psychological testing at the recommendation of psychiatrist provider, at her psychiatrist provider. So met with the psychiatrist first and then did the official testing after that. So step one was psychiatrist testing. She was adopted from India when she was 2 years old. She has a history of learning problems and was provided with special education during most of her schooling, with ongoing intervention and accommodations in math. She completed college and she is in, I'm not going to read that part. She enjoys her job, but she experiences some challenges, especially in managing her caseload and driving responsibilities. Again, I'm kind of reading this the first time, so I'm just making sure I'm not saying anything I don't want to say right here. Teresa reported a history of anxiety, and she takes medication to treat medical conditions. So, not for anxiety, but other things, allergies mainly. She is friendly and cooperative at her testing appointment, or she was friendly and cooperative at her testing appointment, and appeared to put forth a good effort on tasks. So, here's kind of the results of all of those. The results of Teresa's psychological testing reveal an overall cognitive abilities that fall within the very low range, though she demonstrated variable performance in the different areas of cognitive processing. She demonstrated relative strengths in verbal comprehension and fluid reasoning, where her scores fall within the below average range and indicate that her ability to understand and reason with words and her visual reasoning abilities are slightly less developed compared with most individuals her age. So this very much checks out because in my IEP that happened right before I graduated high school, reasoning was a weakness. And I think that's what they're saying. Yeah, reason with words and her visual reasoning abilities are slightly less developed. Yeah, so reasoning with words was definitely like a weakness. So that lines up there. Teresa performed within the very low range in visual, spatial, and working memory, demonstrating less developed visual perceptual abilities and ability to attend to process and briefly store information than most individuals her age. Now, this is an extremely common thing with people with dyscalculia. It actually affects the working memory. And I just saw a whole discussion about this on a Facebook support group page. This is very much what we were talking about is yes, it affects working memory. So the fact that when with math specifically, you very much have to repeat over and over again and reteach us things, that's all because our working memory is very much weakened. So that's supported right here in that sentence. So that's very much the like dyscalculia portion coming in there. Let's see. And visual spatial. So again, when I talked about like being on the freeway, not knowing if I'm going to be able to like merge in somewhere. Sorry, I did not turn off my email here. Like merge in somewhere, especially if like my exit is close or something. Because, sorry guys, I have an itch. Or because I like to stay on the side I'm supposed to be on. If like a right turn, I need to make a right turn next or a left turn next. That very much is visual spatial in this context. So That's what it's talking about. And that is very, like, much a thing when it comes to dyscalculia. Um, so, yes. And more specifically with like math, when we're talking about like shapes and stuff, like two shapes. One of the testing that I did was it was a box, and then there would be like two shapes in a box, and you had to pick like what shape was like closest, like what circle was closest to like the red circle or something like that. I don't remember it like too specifically, because then also there was one where like it was three dots and you had to pick like a similar thing. So that's the kind of thing it's talking about here. Okay. She demonstrated more significant weakness in processing speed, where her scores fall within extremely low range and indicate that her efficiency in processing and completing basic visual motor tasks in much less developed compared with most individuals her age. This is new, but I shared the story how once I was talking with my supervisor, talking about a client, and of course we were talking about numbers, which didn't help anything, but she was including me in the conversation and asked like, Teresa, what do you think? And all I could say was, I'm processing. So that's a thing. And then visual motor tasks. This is completely like new, but this makes sense because as I was looking this up, something I realized I've struggled with recently is actually when it comes to dance, which is super interesting. Because I'm doing an adult dance class, ballet class specifically, we're focused more on technique. And so when we're warming up at the bar, which we are at the bar majority of class, when we're doing tendus at the bar, I'm speaking literally a different language here. When we're doing tendus at the bar, we're doing the combination. My left side doesn't know what it's doing at all. And this makes sense because when it comes to the type of disability I have, research is suggesting that it's something with the right side of the brain. And so when I'm doing like this combination on the left side of my body, that means that the right side of my brain is controlling it. And so this makes a lot of sense. So if I'm having visual motor issues, it makes sense that my left side is having issues because all of that falls onto the right side of the brain. So that's something I've been noticing recently. So, anyways, continuing on. On academic testing, I'm just gonna go through this. This is interesting because there's a chart in here that says my strengths. The scores were very low, but it says here that my strengths include writing samples, reading, recall, reading comprehension, which is interesting because I actually had a reading comprehension like disability as a kid. Like I had that issue when I was younger, and I actually also had like accommodations for that when I was younger. Spelling, I'll get into that for a second. Uh, Phonics words, I don't know how to properly say this word, like decoding, oral reading, and writing fluency. Whereas this slightly, I don't even know, this next part doesn't make sense here because it's listing, it's not even listing, it's just saying where her scores fall within the low average range and indicate that her skills are slightly less developed compared with most individuals her age. So it's listing off strengths and then talking about like the less, like the weaknesses, but it's not like listing those out. But anyways, um that's interesting because again, like reading comprehension was an issue when I was younger. So to see that now as a strength is really interesting. Spelling, when I was younger, my mom, I feel like, had to get the spelling words for the spelling tests a lot earlier than most parents did. And we, like, her and I had to like hammer out the spelling words because, again, like, I struggled so much with the spelling words. And I remember so vaguely seeing like the marks on the spelling test come back. I'm like, oh my God, like that's a lot of red marks on that paper. And so that was also like a huge struggle for me when I was younger. So to see that now as like a strength is really interesting. I'm not surprised that writing is a strength because with dyscalculia specifically, writing then tends to be a strength. Reading recall, that's also not really a surprise for me. Um, Phonics word decoding, again, not really too much of surprise there, just because I'm very logical and I can very much like, I don't know, kind of break it down and figure it out. Oral reading, again, not a surprise. And writing fluency, again, not a surprise. Let's see. No surprise in this next part. Teresa performed within the low range in number matrix in math and applied math problems, demonstrating less developed math reasoning skills than most individuals her age. I really loved how I was like, reading is a strength, and here I am like struggling to read this. But this is like a clinic letter here, so it's just kind of like doesn't really count. But anywho, let's see. She demonstrated most significant weaknesses in calculation and math fluency, where her scores fall within the very low range and indicate that her skills are much less developed compared with most individuals her age. Yep. She demonstrated significant impairment in a visual motor coordination task where her score is ranked below the first percentile and falls within the very low range. That's really interesting. But the math stuff definitely confirms the dyscalculia. So, are we surprised? Nope. Continuing on. Um, Taken together, traits of scores on cognitive and academic assessments indicate relative strengths in verbal reasoning. See, now it says a strength is verbal reasoning. Confusing. And language-based learning skills, including writing, spelling, and reading. Geez, more specifically, her cognitive profile indicates stronger verbal intelligence, which is accumulated verbal knowledge and tasks, and then verbal reasoning, the ability to use verbal knowledge to solve new problems. That very much checks out. In contrast, she demonstrated impairments in visual, spatial, and visual motor tasks, and in math, especially math calculation. And then basically the IEP supports all of that. Covering up like half of my face. So now here's really interesting that she explained to me. This might help somebody out there. More broadly, Teresa's comparative stronger verbal abilities and weaker visual abilities are suggestive of nonverbal learning disorder, a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects an individual's ability to process and interpret nonverbal information, such as, sorry guys, I'm going to try to hold it together here, facial expressions and spatial relationships. Adults with nonverbal learning disorders may experience a range of symptoms, including difficulty understanding social cues and interpreting body language, problem with navigation and map reading, difficulty with fine motor tasks, and overall motor coordination challenges, and difficulties in math, science, and visual spatial objects. Um, Individuals may also have difficulty with time management and planning, and they may have emotional regulation difficulties, including anxiety and sensitivity to feedback and criticism. So, here's what's really interesting why I laughed because um a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects an individual's ability to process and interpret nonverbal information. It's just an example, such as facial expressions. You don't know me and my background. I grew up doing theater since I was 5 years old. Yeah, um, very in tune with facial expressions. I also have a very, very high EQ that scores well in the 90s, like 96%, uh, maybe a little bit higher than that. So, like a 98%, I think, is maybe the last one I did. I don't remember. It was 96 or 98, something like that. It's very high. It's above normal. Normal EQ, I believe, is like 50%. Um, I'm just really curious. Average? Oh, do they raise that? Like empathy? Well, this is interesting. This is giving me like very wide range because one spot is saying like for women, an average score is like 47. An average. Maybe I have a normal one. This one's saying 75. I don't know. This is all over the place, so I don't know. Coming back to this, anywho. But being in theater, I don't think that's a struggle for me. But spatial relationships, obviously. Reading a map, like I said, I have to very much rely on GPS no matter where I go. Um, and I'm getting better with that with my job, but I still like to rely on GPS. Even to like reroute. And difficulty with fine motor tasks. Sorry, hiccup. And overall motor coordination. I never thought about that. But also with me being like really short, I'm like, huh, maybe that has something to do with it. And like I said, the only thing I've noticed recently is that ballet thing. And interesting that it says difficulties in science. Now, when I did physical science in freshman year of high school, I believe that was really hard because a lot of the math stuff, like balancing equations, was hard. But for the most part, like science is like one of my stronger spots, like academically. So that's interesting. Sensitive sensitivity to feedback and criticism. This is actually really true. However, one of the hard things is too, though, I am a genuine like empath. Like I read people extremely well. I can very much like take on people's emotions as my own, which I hate to a degree. So yeah. Now for like ADHD, this basically says here that I do have tendencies of ADHD. However, um, my symptom history does not clearly indicate a pattern of inattention that significantly impacts my functioning, and students with learning problems often have difficulties with working memory, like I said earlier. However, I'm a hard worker who has developed good organizational skills, and those tendencies may mask underlying attention problems, while other diagnoses are more clearly indicated based on my symptom history and testing results. ADHD cannot be ruled out. So that kind of makes sense there. History of anxiety. This is really interesting too. Um, though I currently endorse minimal symptoms of anxiety on the self reported thing, uh, my responses are strongly suggestive of anxiety, including worries, and overall and an over control of her emotions. That checks. While there are indicators of generalized anxiety, Teresa's current symptoms indicate at least mild symptoms of social anxiety disorder. This is really interesting, which is anxiety of fear of being judged and rejection, that whole thing. Individual literally says here, individuals constantly feel on stage, which can lead to a great deal of self-consciousness, distress, and avoidance. Positively, Teresa pushes herself to approach social situations, and that may help in reducing the impact of her anxiety symptoms. So this is really interesting because it literally says generalized anxiety, but then it says social anxiety, and that's so interesting because again, like I do theater. I also like do these YouTube videos where I put myself out there and I'm very much aware of the fact that like not everybody likes my content, that there's haters out there. I post on TikTok. It's the same thing. Very much aware that people hate me on TikTok and stuff. So I'm like, I definitely put myself out there and I put my life out there as well, um, doing these YouTube videos. And so that's kind of interesting. I definitely do get social anxiety like prior to certain things. Like I went to a Pentatonics concert on Wednesday and just like the anxiety of like, hey, how early do I have to be there? Because I went to a place that like I've never gone to before. So like how early do I have to be there? How long like is security gonna take? Um, I read all the things about like security, like what you can bring, what you can't bring. Um, had to read up on parking as well. Um, things of that nature, how to like relook at, okay, where is my seat? Look at the map for that. It's things like that. I have an audition coming up for a play as well. And so just kind of like the pre anxiety. Luckily, I know where this place is. I know they have a parking lot. So that's not really giving me anxiety. It's just like the anxiety of the fact like this is a Shakespeare play and Shakespeare is very hard to understand. So if I can't like understand what I'm saying, that could affect my ability to like be cast in this, because I need to like convey what I'm saying, right? So it's stuff like that that really causes me anxiety more than like being in front of people. Like I'm very much extroverted. So that's kind of interesting. So I feel like I have social anxiety in a way that like people don't think of social anxiety. Like um so yeah, that's very interesting. And then it just goes into like treating it basically. So that's kind of that. Overall, when I talked to her, it was very much the same. Like nothing like changed overall. Like I said, the very interesting thing was the whole like coordination and skills like being off. And I feel like I don't know. I'm like, does that have anything to do with like being as short as I am? But it's just so interesting because it's like there's no known cause of this. And for me specifically being adopted, having a close adoption, I don't have really any knowledge of the first like before the first like 2 years of my life. I don't know if my mom technically had a healthy pregnancy. I don't know if, you know, the delivery was healthy. I mean, again, I was adopted from India. It's a third world country. So I think it's kind of not right to assume that like everything was fine when I was born. I do know now, like after this testing and stuff, that I was breastfed as a baby, but then I had to switch over to like formula or something, and then that did cause me to lose weight. And so I do think like a lot of the challenges I've faced and maybe like part of the causes to a lot of this from research that I found is linked to trauma. And so I do think like a lot of the adoption trauma plays into all of this. So yeah, that's just kind of like theories and stuff. But yeah, kind of all interesting to read up on and um kind of learn about and deep dive. And I know like going into the personality part, there was a part that said like an over control of behaviors. But when I read through that, um, it was like she endorsed this or something. Like, so it was very much like through like self assessment kind of things. So that was really interesting as well to read. And it also said like inflexibility of like interactions with others. And that really bugged me until I read again. It said like she endorsed that as well. And I was like, oh, that could have been like me talking about how my mom says I'm very like inflexible to certain things. Like I'm very rigid, like through my mom's eyes, my adopted mom's eyes, very rigid and like routine and stuff. Where now I'm like, wait a minute, like I'm not like that. Um, I'm very much adaptable now because of what I do for work, having to like cover for a lot of people. The amount of changes we've been going through is insane, and I got people to testify for that. Um, so yeah, so just kind of interesting overall. If you guys have any more questions, I'm gonna talk with somebody else about this um, to kind of go over it as well. And yeah, maybe I'll end up doing a part two once I kind of talk to that person a little bit more because she'll understand a little bit more than me. And then, yeah, I hope you guys all have a great weekend. I probably won't do a video next week. My parents are coming up next week, so definitely won't do a video next week. Other than that, I hope you guys are all having a great weekend. I know this video was super long, but when you get test results, they are pretty long, especially when it comes to this. Um, because yeah, this is actually like really, really thick. So other than that, I hope you guys liked this video. Give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe down below, hit the bell for notifications. I post every single weekend, and I will see you all later. Bye.